Unaware his wife was the billionaire funding his contract, he signed everything over to his mistress. What happened next ruined him completely. He didn't just betray her once, he erased her. Daniel Carter thought the moment he signed those papers, he'd finally cut himself free from caution, from doubt, from the woman who had quietly stood behind him while the world applauded him. He believed success came from boldness, from choosing the louder voice, from replacing patience with praise. So when the funding email disappeared, when payroll failed, when his phone stopped ringing, Daniel didn't panic. Not at first. Men like him never do. He laughed, called it a glitch, blamed systems, blamed timing, blamed everyone except the woman sleeping in the next room who had quietly paid for every win he ever celebrated. What Daniel didn't know was that the contracts he bragged about were never really his. The money he trusted wasn't loyal to him. And the woman he dismissed as too small had designed a world where betrayal didn't explode at closed doors, quietly. While Daniel chased validation through late-night calls and flattery from a woman who admired his reflection more than his character, Evelyn Carter sat in silence, watching dashboards only she and her trustee could see. She didn't scream. She didn't confront. She let cruelty expose itself. Because the most wicked revenge isn't loud. It's letting someone destroy themselves with their own signature. Years earlier, when the very first funding agreement for Daniel's company was drafted, Evelyn had insisted on protections no one in his world ever bothered to read twice. Reversion clauses, control triggers, conditions tied to trust and loyalty. They were buried in the back pages, wrapped in legal language, signed by Daniel in the rush to get started. He never asked why they were there. He never asked who they protected. By the time Daniel realized the money had stopped answering him, the mistress had already stepped away. The lawyer had already turned pale, and the final clause written long before Lydia ever appeared was already awake. He thought he was choosing freedom. He was choosing collapse. Dear viewers, thank you for being here. If you watch without subscribing, it's like letting Evelyn's silence go unheard. When you subscribe, you stand with every person who was underestimated, erased, and betrayed, then prove that dignity is the most dangerous weapon of all. Like, share, and comment the lesson that stayed with you. Tell me where you're watching from. The first big contract came through at midnight. Daniel Carter stared at his phone, breath caught in his chest, as the notification refreshed again and again. Approved, a six-figure deal, his biggest yet. He let out a sharp laugh, the kind that came from disbelief mixed with pride, and turned toward the woman standing quietly a few steps behind him. Evelyn, he said, voice shaking with excitement. This changes everything. Evelyn Carter smiled, but softly, always softly. She had learned long ago that loud joy invited questions, and questions were dangerous. Evelyn was 34, calm in a way that made people underestimate her. She dressed simply, spoke carefully, and never corrected anyone when they assumed she lived an ordinary life. To the world, she was just the wife of an ambitious contractor trying to build something from nothing. But years before Daniel ever signed his first deal, Evelyn had already owned more than most people would ever see. She was 26 when her parents died within months of each other. The grief left behind something else too, an empire no one talked about publicly. Her family had owned a private investment firm that specialized in quiet acquisitions and long-term stakes. When the firm was sold, the payout was staggering, well into billionaire territory once everything was totaled. Evelyn inherited everything. The money didn't arrive with celebration. It arrived with lawyers, locked rooms, and silence. She learned quickly that wealth changed how people looked at her, how they spoke, how they loved. So she made a decision that shaped the rest of her life. She placed every cent into blind trusts, structures designed to protect assets and identities. The trusts invested through a discreet corporate trustee, Miller Advisory Holdings, that appeared on paperwork instead of her own name. And she chose one person to manage them, Grace Miller. Grace was in her late 50s, sharp-eyed and steady, and had worked with Evelyn's parents for decades. She wasn't just a trustee, she was a shield, a woman who understood discretion the way others understood ambition. Your life doesn't need to shrink because of this, Grace had told her, but it does need to be protected. When Evelyn met Daniel 2 years later, she didn't tell him any of that. Daniel was 36 then, confident, driven, always talking about the future. He worked long hours, believed deeply in effort and reward, and talked about success as if it were a mountain he could climb if he just moved fast enough. Evelyn liked that about him. He believed in building. But she had already learned the cost of being chosen for the wrong reasons. She didn't hide her wealth to test Daniel. She hid it because she wanted something real. So when Daniel asked about money early in their relationship, she smiled and said, "I'm comfortable." When he suggested combining finances, she gently refused. "Separate is peaceful," she said. "Less pressure." Daniel shrugged. He liked her independence. Before they married, her lawyers insisted on a clean prenuptial agreement. Her inherited assets and the trust that invested in his business would always stay separate, no matter what happened between them. Daniel signed it quickly. He was in love, and the only line he really cared about was the one that made them husband and wife. It made him feel like he wasn't being taken care of. What he never questioned was how his early contracts kept working out. The first time an investor backed out at the last minute, another one appeared quietly, efficiently, with better terms. When his credit fell short, approvals still came through. When bids should have failed, they didn't. Behind the scenes, Evelyn made one call every time. To Grace. Grace handled the rest. The funding came through a shell investment group, Miller Advisory Holdings, acting for an unnamed trust that couldn't be traced back to Evelyn on any basic search. The paperwork was clean, legal, standard for private capital. Evelyn never attended meetings, never signed in person, never asked for recognition. She only asked one thing. Every time Daniel brought home a contract, excitement buzzing in his voice, Evelyn would read it carefully. Then she would look up and ask, almost casually, "Is this protected if things change?" Daniel always laughed. "You worry too much." He remembered that Grace's office, introduced to him as a discreet private fund, had already reviewed everything with his lawyer, Paul, years earlier. He treated it as background noise. She never argued. She just nodded and quietly checked with Grace that the clauses she'd insisted on were still in every deal. Investor control, reversion rights, strict conditions if Daniel ever tried to move the company away from its original protections. That night, Daniel opened a bottle of cheap champagne in their kitchen, celebrating his latest win. He talked about expansion, about reputation, about finally being taken seriously. Evelyn listened. Watched the way his eyes lit up when he spoke about himself. She loved him, quietly, completely. She loved him enough to stay invisible. As Daniel talked, his phone buzzed again. Another email, another confirmation. He raised his glass, pride swelling. "This is just the beginning," he said. Evelyn lifted her glass too, but her thoughts drifted elsewhere to the trusts, the clauses, the protections she had insisted on years ago. Not because she planned for betrayal, but because she believed love didn't mean blindness. Grace's name appeared briefly on Evelyn's phone screen. A simple message. All structures stable. Funding routed as agreed. Evelyn slipped the phone away. Daniel turned toward her, smiling wide, unaware of how much of that smile rested on foundations he had never seen. As he talked about the future, Evelyn studied him. Not with fear, not with doubt, but with something closer to hope. Hope that he would never give her a reason to step out of the shadows. When Daniel finally laughed and pulled her into a brief, distracted embrace, Evelyn rested her head against his shoulder and whispered so softly he didn't hear it. "I hope you never forget who helped you stand." Daniel raised his glass again, celebrating his success. And somewhere deep beneath the contracts and the smiles, something quiet shifted unnoticed, waiting. In the next months, Daniel would step into rooms Evelyn was never invited to, and doors once opened in silence would begin to close just as quietly. The applause came before Daniel even finished speaking. He stood at the front of the conference room, shoulders back, voice confident, watching faces nod as his presentation ended. A moment later, his phone vibrated in his pocket. He didn't need to look to know what it was. Another approval, another win. Daniel Carter smiled like a man who had finally proven something to the room, to his past, to himself. "This is just the beginning," he said, soaking in the attention. Across the room, Mark Reynolds, his business partner, leaned back in his chair, shaking his head with a grin. Mark was a few years older than Daniel, practical and cautious by nature, the kind of man who checked numbers twice and trusted optimism once. After the meeting, Mark clapped Daniel on the shoulder. "Man," he said, half joking, half serious, "it's like someone upstairs wants you to win." Daniel laughed loudly. "I told you, Hard work, timing, skill. He didn't mention Evelyn. He didn't think to. Over the next few weeks, the pace became unreal. Bids Daniel submitted late at night were approved by morning. Investors who hesitated were replaced within hours by the same anonymous fund, Miller Advisory Holdings. Quiet, efficient, never asking for meetings or credit. Mark noticed. "Have you ever met them?" he asked once. "This fund? Miller?" Daniel shrugged. "My lawyer does. They prefer to stay in the background. It's normal with private money." It was true. Years earlier, Paul had explained that some families invested through trusts and corporate names and never appeared in person. Daniel had nodded, signed where he was told, and focused only on the word approved. At home, Evelyn noticed something else. Daniel stopped bringing contracts to the kitchen table. He used to sit across from her, papers spread out, asking what she thought. Now, documents stayed in his briefcase. Decisions were made before she knew they existed. When Evelyn raised concerns about growth moving too fast, about long-term risk, Daniel waved them away. "You worry too much," he said, smiling like it was affection. This is how momentum works. The words stung more than she expected. At night, Daniel talked about expansion, about reputation, about how people finally respected him. He said "my company" when he spoke about the future, not our future. Evelyn listened, nodding, asking fewer questions. Not because she didn't care, but because she felt the distance growing, thin at first, then undeniable. One evening, Daniel rushed out the door for a late meeting. Evelyn watched him from the window as he checked his phone, distracted, energized. Her own phone buzzed softly moments later. A message from Grace Miller. They met the next morning in a quiet office that didn't carry Grace's name on the door. Grace sat across from Evelyn, calm as ever, hands folded neatly. "You look tired," Grace said. Evelyn didn't deny it. "I need to ask you something," Evelyn said, her voice steady but low. "If someone betrays the trust we built around him, if he acts against the structure." Grace met her eyes. No surprise there. "The contracts still protect the source," Grace said simply. "They always have. The trust can withdraw or revert control if the conditions are broken." Evelyn exhaled slowly. Not relief, not fear, just understanding. She remembered insisting on those clauses years ago, the long meetings, the quiet arguments with lawyers who thought she was being overly cautious. She hadn't been planning revenge. She had been planning survival. Back at the office, Daniel's confidence grew sharper. He spoke over Mark in meetings now. He dismissed concerns about sustainability. "This is my vision," he said. "You either keep up or you get out of the way." Mark said nothing, but he noticed. That afternoon, Daniel received an email marked private invitation, a networking event, exclusive, invitation only, high-level investors and consultants. Daniel's name was listed alone. When he mentioned it at home, he didn't even look up from his phone. "It's a big deal," he said. "Not really your scene." The words landed quietly. He didn't hear the silence that followed. Evelyn smiled faintly. Of course. She watched him leave again, confident, unaware of the invisible hands that had lifted him so far. Later that night, while Daniel slept, Evelyn sat alone, scrolling through financial dashboards only she and Grace could access. Everything still flowed through the same channels. Everything still led back to her trusts. For now. She closed the screen, her reflection staring back at her in the dark glass. Evelyn didn't feel angry. She felt unseen. And somewhere between Daniel's growing pride and her growing silence, the balance they once shared shifted just enough for something else to step in. As Daniel prepared for a world that didn't include her, Evelyn sensed that the doors opening for him were leading somewhere dangerous. Soon, someone new would walk into those rooms, and Daniel would mistake admiration for loyalty. The first message came in after midnight. Daniel Carter's phone lit up on the bedside table, bright enough to cut through the dark. He reached for it quickly, careful not to wake Evelyn, his thumb moving with a practiced ease that felt too familiar for something so new. "Lydia Moore, great meeting tonight. You handled that room like a natural leader." Daniel smiled to himself. Lydia Moore was 32, sharp, confident, and newly contracted as a business consultant for Daniel's growing company. She came recommended from the exclusive networking circle he had recently been invited into. On paper, her role was simple strategy, growth planning, investor alignment, From the first meeting, her attention had been fixed entirely on Daniel. "You're different," she had told him that night, leaning back in her chair, studying him like a project she already owned. "Most men at your level didn't build it themselves. You did." Daniel didn't correct her. He didn't mention that without a silent funder, the company wouldn't exist at all. He liked the way she said you. Lydia spoke quickly, confidently, always just a little closer than necessary. She asked questions that made Daniel feel seen about his vision, his frustrations, his ambition, and she listened in a way that felt rare, especially compared to home. At home, Evelyn listened too, but she asked questions about risks, about sustainability, about consequences. Lydia asked about legacy. The difference mattered. Over the next week, messages came more often, short at first, professional, then warmer. Late-night texts about meetings that ran long. Laughing calls Daniel took outside, pacing the quiet street while Evelyn lay awake inside, staring at the ceiling. Evelyn noticed everything. She noticed how Daniel angled his phone away, how he smiled at messages he didn't share, how his tone changed when he said Lydia's name light, almost eager. Still, Evelyn said nothing. She had learned long ago that confrontation without certainty only created lies. One evening, Lydia joined Daniel for a video call from their living room. Evelyn was in the kitchen, pretending to read, when Lydia's face appeared on the screen. Lydia was polished, perfect posture, smooth voice, eyes that never wavered. "Daniel," she said warmly, "I've been reviewing your numbers. Honestly, you're wasted potential." Daniel laughed. "What does that mean?" "It means," Lydia continued, lowering her voice slightly, "you're carrying people who don't understand your scale." Evelyn looked up. Lydia's gaze flicked briefly past the camera, noticing Evelyn for the first time. She smiled tight, measured. "I just wonder," Lydia said casually, "why someone with your drive stays so small." Daniel gave a short, dismissive laugh. "Evelyn likes everything small. Small risks, small circle, small life. She'd rather I play safe than play big." Lydia's lips curved. "Then maybe you've outgrown the life she wants." The word lingered. Daniel didn't respond. He didn't disagree either. Later that night, Evelyn asked gently, "She seems confident." Daniel shrugged. "She's just helping me grow." Evelyn nodded. "Of course." Inside, something quiet shifted again. Days passed, then weeks. Lydia's influence grew. She began suggesting changes, new advisors, new structures, new priorities. She questioned Evelyn's role openly now. "Does she really support your vision?" Lydia asked once, over speakerphone, unaware Evelyn was nearby. Daniel hesitated. "Support doesn't always mean holding you back," Lydia continued smoothly. "Some people are just meant to be left behind." The words landed hard. Evelyn stood frozen in the hallway, listening. She didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't interrupt. When the call ended, Daniel didn't notice her standing there. Evelyn walked into the bedroom without a sound. That night, she didn't sleep. Instead, she opened the secure financial dashboard, one she hadn't checked personally in weeks. Grace usually handled everything, but instinct pulled her now. As the screen loaded, Evelyn felt a tightness in her chest she couldn't name. Then she saw it. Document access request pending approval. User. External legal consultant linked entity. Carter Strategic Projects Limited. Daniel's company. Purpose. Structural review. Ownership restructuring. Evelyn stared at the screen. She hadn't authorized any change. Grace hadn't mentioned it. The only way an external consultant could be requesting core documents from the funding structure was if someone on Daniel's side had invited them in. Someone like Lydia. Another request appeared beneath it, and another. Not withdrawals, not transfers. Something else. Due diligence packs, shareholder agreements, security documents, everything tied to the trust that quietly backed Daniel's business. Evelyn's fingers hovered over the keyboard, her reflection faint in the dark glass of the screen. For the first time since meeting Daniel, she didn't feel unseen. She felt warned. Behind her, Daniel slept peacefully. And somewhere between ambition and admiration, something far more dangerous had just stepped into their marriage. In the next days, a new structure would be suggested, and a signature would quietly begin to unravel everything she had built around him. The pen hit the paper with a sharp, final sound. Daniel Carter barely noticed it. He was standing in a glass-walled conference room, city reflections bouncing off the windows, his pulse high with confidence. The documents lay spread across the table, thick and official, the kind that made people feel powerful just by touching them. "This is standard," Paul Henderson said calmly. Paul was Daniel's lawyer, mid-40s, polished, efficient, someone Daniel trusted because Paul never sounded unsure. He had handled Daniel's contract since the early days, when the first funding came from the anonymous Miller Advisory Holdings Trust. Beside Daniel stood Lydia Moore, arms folded, expression warm and encouraging. She nodded as Paul spoke, her confidence filling the room. "It's about efficiency," Lydia added smoothly. "You're growing fast. You need cleaner control." On the top page, the new structure was laid out clearly enough. Daniel's shares and project contracts would be transferred into a new holding company, Carter Strategic Projects Limited. Lydia would be appointed as managing director with authority to sign on the company's behalf. Daniel's personal interest would be defined in a way that kept it separate from his marital assets. "Right now," Lydia said, leaning closer, "your wife can complicate everything if things go south. This removes that risk. We move the business out of the marriage. No drama, no arguments." Daniel flipped through the pages quickly. Numbers, legal terms, diagrams showing arrows from his old company into the new one. At the back, in smaller print, were references Paul barely pointed at. "This holding company remains subject to existing security and funding arrangements, as set out in the original Miller advisory agreements," Paul said, tapping the paragraph. "We're not changing your primary investor, just how you hold your stake." Lydia's voice slipped in over his shoulder. "This isn't emotional. It's practical. You can't keep tying your future to someone who doesn't understand where you're going." Over the past weeks, Lydia had been careful, patient. She never insulted Evelyn directly. She just asked questions. "Why does your wife insist on separate finances? Why does she need an advisor involved in everything? Why does she worry about protection instead of growth? You're carrying weight that isn't helping you," Lydia said now. "Emotionally and legally." Paul adjusted his glasses. "This restructuring simplifies ownership. It protects you from interference in the event of a marital dispute. Your existing agreements with the fund remain in place, including all conditions you signed at the start." Daniel hesitated for half a second. He dimly remembered those old documents. Long meetings. Paul and some trustee from Miller Advisory walking him through terms about reversion rights and marital conduct. He'd been so focused on finally getting funding that he hadn't cared. He signed because he needed the money. He told himself Lydia was right. He told himself he deserved to put himself first now. At home, Evelyn felt the shift before she understood it. Her phone buzzed once. She was sitting alone at the kitchen table, laptop open, the trust dashboard already pulled up from the night before. The notification was brief, clinical, event logged, structural change filed entity, Carter Strategic Projects Limited status. Under review funding conditions, check. Evelyn's breath stilled. Back in the conference room, Paul slid the final page forward. "Sign here to transfer your interests. This also reconfirms your acceptance of the original funding conditions." He paused. "Including the personal conduct clause we discussed years ago." Daniel nodded impatiently. "Nothing in my personal life is a problem." He didn't mention Lydia. He didn't admit that Thomas or anyone else could ever prove otherwise. The pen moved again. As the ink dried, Daniel felt strangely lighter, as if he'd finally cut himself free from Evelyn's constant questions and quiet caution. With that single motion, Daniel signed away his wife's informal moral claim to the company and handed Lydia formal control in day-to-day operations on paper. At the same time, he reaffirmed the old funding agreements he had never really read. Buried deep in those original contracts, now carried forward into this restructure were protections Evelyn had insisted on. A reversion clause, funding authority tied permanently to the original investor's trust. A condition that if the primary beneficiary of the company breached marital trust, the investor could withdraw funding and take back control of the secured assets. Evelyn didn't see the signatures, but she saw the consequence. At home, her dashboard refreshed. A line of text appeared. "Trigger window, open conduct review permitted under clause 14. She closed her laptop slowly. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't confront Daniel when he walked through the door later that evening, energized, distracted, talking about streamlining, freedom, and how Lydia understood the business in a way Evelyn never did. Evelyn listened. She always did. That night, after Daniel fell asleep, Evelyn stepped into the hallway and made a single call. Grace answered on the first ring. "He signed," Evelyn said quietly. "He moved everything and put her in charge." There was a pause, not surprise, just confirmation. "That means the trust is allowed to review whether he's still honoring the conditions he signed," Grace said. "If he isn't, you can choose whether we keep protecting him." Evelyn closed her eyes, absorbing the weight of it. Protection didn't automatically mean punishment. It meant the option of consequences. She hung up and returned to the bedroom, lying beside a man who had just undermined her in writing, without knowing she was the one his agreements had always been built around. As Daniel slept, secure in decisions he didn't understand, the systems he never knew existed moved from passive protection to active review, quietly, precisely. And somewhere in the layers of contracts and silence, a clock started not automatic punishment, but a countdown to a choice only Evelyn could make. The sound of the door closing echoed too loudly. Daniel had just left for work, confident, distracted, already talking into his phone as he walked away. The lock clicked behind him, and the house fell into a silence so deep it felt heavy. Evelyn Carter stood frozen in the middle of the living room, her hands trembling for the first time in years. This was it, the moment she had been avoiding. She didn't sit down right away. She paced instead, her steps sharp, uneven, like her body was finally releasing everything her mind had been holding back. Her chest tightened, her breath hitched. Then it came. The betrayal didn't arrive as anger. It arrived as grief. Evelyn sank onto the edge of the couch, pressing her hand to her mouth as memories rushed in without warning. She saw herself years ago, sitting in a quiet office late at night, authorizing wire transfers under names no one would ever recognize. Millions moved with a click. No applause, no thanks. She remembered standing at the back of a small conference room during Daniel's first failed pitch. He had been nervous, sweaty, almost defeated. She stayed silent while others dismissed him. That night, she told Grace to approve emergency funding under Miller Advisory's name. She remembered every time Daniel's voice grew louder as his confidence grew every time he interrupted her, dismissed her concerns, called her cautious, and every time she chose silence instead of conflict because she loved him, quietly, completely. Evelyn closed her eyes, allowing the pain to wash through her at last. Not for long, just enough to honor what had been real. Then she stood. The shift was subtle but final. She picked up her phone and called Grace Miller. Grace answered calmly, as always. "I was expecting your call. I don't want emotion involved," Evelyn said. Her voice was steady now. "I want facts." Grace nodded on the other end, already moving. "Then you'll want documentation. If we're going to exercise Clause 14, we need proof of breach, not feeling, evidence." That afternoon, Evelyn met Thomas Reed. Thomas was in his early 40s, plain-looking, forgettable by design. A former compliance investigator who now worked privately, not to expose scandals publicly, but to make them undeniable in court and in boardrooms. "I don't want surveillance for jealousy," Evelyn told him directly. "I want records, timelines, proof that he turned our marriage into a liability and handed control to someone else." Thomas understood immediately. "Clean and legal," he said. "No drama, phone records, messages, meetings, paper only." Over the next days, information arrived quietly. Messages, meeting logs, hotel receipts, call histories that matched Lydia's schedule. Signatures on the restructuring documents placing Lydia in day-to-day control of the new company. Thomas laid it all out clearly. Dates, patterns, intent. This wasn't suspicion anymore. It was evidence. Evelyn reviewed everything with precision. No tears, no shaking hands. She treated the betrayal like a business failure, painful but manageable. At night, when the house was quiet, she opened a fresh folder on her laptop. Divorce petition draft. She filled in the details slowly, carefully. Grounds, adultery, timeline. Supported by Thomas's report. She didn't sign it. Not yet. Instead, she paused, her fingers hovering above the screen, remembering the woman she had been when she first chose to trust Daniel. I loved him quietly, she whispered to the empty room. Now I'll end this the same way, Grace called later that evening. The conduct file is complete, Grace said. If you file the petition, the trust will accept it as formal notice of breach. Under the clauses he signed, we're allowed if you wish to withdraw funding and enforce our rights over the secured contracts. Evelyn nodded, even though Grace couldn't see her. No warnings, she said. He signed knowing there were conditions. He chose not to understand them. No warnings, Grace agreed. Once the court stamps your petition and he's served, we'll suspend all new funding and freeze what we control. The notice will go out automatically to his company as a standard funding status update. The plan was clinical, legal, precise. Across town, Daniel sat at his desk, scrolling through emails, smiling at his reflection in the glass window behind his computer. He felt untouchable, certain. The next morning, while he argued with a subcontractor over the phone, his assistant walked in and handed him a thick envelope court-stamped, his name printed across the front. He tossed it onto the desk without opening it. A few minutes later, a new message appeared at the top of his inbox. Subject: Funding status update from Miller Advisory Holdings. Daniel frowned. He clicked it confused, curious, unconcerned. The screen refreshed. And somewhere far away, Evelyn closed her laptop and turned off the lights in her study. The storm had already begun. He just hadn't realized he was standing at the center of it. Daniel Carter hit refresh again, and again. His jaw tightened as the same email stayed on the screen, calm and unmoved by his growing irritation. Subject: Funding status update from Miller Advisory Holdings Body. Effective immediately. All active funding tied to Contract Series A and related facilities has been suspended following invocation of Clause 1 for reversion of authority upon breach. Daniel let out a sharp laugh. Too sharp. This has to be a mistake, he muttered, leaning back in his chair. A system error. He refreshed his inbox a third time. Nothing changed. For years, whenever something went wrong, money arrived. A delay here, a gap there. Somehow, it always fixed itself. He had learned to trust that rhythm. It had never failed him. Until now. He stood up, straightened his jacket, and walked toward the window. Phone already in his hand, he dialed the finance department. No answer. He was about to try again when the door flew open. Ethan Brooks, the company's chief financial officer, rushed in without knocking. Ethan was in his early 40s, usually calm, always precise. Today, his face was pale, his tie loosened, sweat visible at his hairline. Daniel. Ethan said breathless, "We have a serious problem." Daniel waved him off. "I just got a stupid email from Miller. It's not a glitch," Ethan interrupted, placing a tablet on the desk. "The accounts are frozen." Daniel's smile faded. "What do you mean frozen?" "I mean," Ethan said carefully, "incoming funds from Miller Advisory have stopped. Completely. The revolving facility is locked. Payroll didn't clear this morning, and our automatic payments bounced." Daniel's stomach dropped. "That's impossible," he snapped. "We have reserves." Ethan swallowed. "We did. Those reserves sit in accounts secured under the same master facility. When Miller invoked Clause 14, the bank locked everything tied to them. Compliance flagged us in their system." Daniel stared at him. "Untie them." "We can't," Ethan replied. "Those security documents were signed years ago. The bank won't move without Miller's written consent. I've already tried our relationship manager." The room felt suddenly smaller. Daniel's phone buzzed, a message from a subcontractor. Then another. Then another. "Payment not received. We're pausing work until funds clear. Please advise." Daniel slammed his phone down. "Call them back. Tell them it's being handled." Ethan hesitated. "They've already stopped answering." Word spreads fast when a primary investor freezes funding. Before Daniel could respond, Mark Reynolds stepped into the doorway. Mark's expression wasn't panic, but it wasn't calm either. It was searching. "What's going on?" Mark asked. Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it. Ethan answered instead. "Funding suspension." Miller pulled the plug. Mark blinked. "Suspension?" Daniel turned sharply. "It's temporary." Mark didn't look convinced. "From who exactly?" "Miller Advisory is just a trustee." "Who's behind them?" Daniel waved a hand. "High net worth family, trust, whatever. We've talked about this. They prefer anonymity. That's how they work. Mark stepped closer. Daniel, every major operation has a primary investor. Someone signs. Someone answers calls. Daniel felt heat rise in his chest. Why does that matter now? Mark didn't raise his voice. Because when money stops, the first question everyone asks is, who do we call? Ethan scrolled on the tablet. I spoke to Miller's office, he said quietly. They wouldn't talk details, confidentiality. But they did say the suspension followed formal notice of breach in the Carter marital estate and restructuring contrary to the spirit of the original agreement. Daniel's breath grew, shallow. What breach? He demanded. There's no detail beyond breach of marital trust and reversion of authority to the original beneficiary, Ethan replied, whatever that means. The phrase hit like a physical blow. Reversion of authority, original beneficiary. Daniel's phone buzzed again, this time with a calendar notification he'd ignored earlier. New event added by Henderson legal subject, urgent divorce petition, funding impact. He'd seen the thick envelope this morning on his desk. Court stamp, his name. He'd shoved it aside, telling himself he'd deal with it after the important stuff. Now the important stuff was collapsing around him. Okay, Daniel said, forcing calm. We'll bridge this. Short-term loan, emergency line of credit. We have contracts on the books. Ethan shook his head. We already tried. The bank refused without written comfort from Miller. And once a major fund formally invokes a conduct clause, every lender gets nervous. Daniel's breath turned ragged. This doesn't make sense, he said. Nothing like this has ever happened. Mark studied him. Exactly. Silence filled the room. Daniel looked around at the desk he had fought for, the office that symbolized his rise. For the first time, it all felt fragile. Ethan cleared his throat. We need a plan. Staff are asking questions. Subcontractors are threatening legal action. And if Miller doesn't change their position, we can't pay anyone in a matter of days. Daniel stared at the email on his screen again. Clause 1-4 reversion of authority upon breach. Status. Invoked. Funding authority reverted to original trust beneficiary. He had signed that clause years ago. He had reaffirmed it when Lydia pushed the restructure. He'd never bothered to ask who that original trust beneficiary was. His phone vibrated sharply. Lydia. Relief surged through him. He grabbed the phone and stepped into the hallway as he dialed back. The call rang. Once, twice. Then went to voicemail. Daniel stopped walking. He tried again. Straight to voicemail. A knot tightened in his chest. Mark watched from the doorway, his face unreadable. She's your consultant, right? He asked quietly. Daniel didn't answer. Behind him, his office door remained open, the sound of worried voices spilling out. For the first time in years, nothing moved to save him. No money, no approvals. No silent solution. Somewhere far away, the trust Evelyn had built had already shifted. The protection was gone. The consequences were catching up. Daniel stared down at his phone. Schedule a meeting with Lydia, he told his assistant hoarsely. Now. In the next moment, he would realize that the woman he'd chosen over his wife had already calculated the risk and decided he wasn't worth it. Daniel Carter pushed through the glass doors too fast. They swung back behind him with a sharp snap that echoed through the quiet cafe lobby. His heart was racing, his phone clenched tightly in his hand, his mind scrambling for control that had slipped away hours ago. He spotted Lydia more immediately. She was already seated at a corner table, posture straight, coat still on, phone face down beside her coffee. She didn't look surprised to see him. She didn't even stand. That was the first warning. Daniel crossed the room quickly and dropped into the chair across from her. Thank God, he said, forcing a smile. I've been calling you. Lydia met his eyes calmly. No warmth, no concern, just calculation. I know, she said. Daniel leaned forward. Something's wrong with the funding. Miller froze everything. Ethan's panicking. Mark's asking questions, but it'll clear. It always does. You said, that's why I'm here, Lydia said, cutting him off gently. The words landed wrong. Daniel frowned. What do you mean? She finally looked away, glancing toward the window. I made some calls this morning. Quiet ones. Daniel's chest tightened. Calls to who? Other investors, Lydia said plainly. People I know from the network. People who don't like uncertainty. Daniel felt heat rush to his face. Why would you do that without talking to me? Lydia looked back at him then, her expression cool. Because I thought you owned the company. The cafe noise faded. Daniel heard only his own breathing. I do, he said quickly. I mean, I run it. That's not what I mean, Lydia replied. I assumed you had full control, full authority, that your main backer would follow you, not the other way around. Daniel swallowed. I do have control. There's just structure, agreements, standard stuff. Lydia's lips pressed into a thin line. I asked around. No one could give me a straight answer on who really controls your funding. The only consistent thing I heard was Miller Advisory and that they've invoked a conduct clause. That's not standard stuff, Daniel. That's toxic. She reached for her phone, tapped once, then slid it back into her coat pocket. That's when I realized something. Daniel leaned in closer. Realize what? That you're not as stable as you made yourself sound. The words cut deeper than he expected. I'm fixing it, Daniel said urgently. This is temporary. I gave up a lot for this. For me? Lydia interrupted softly. Daniel hesitated. For us. For the business. I moved everything into the new company. I made you managing director. I trusted you. Lydia stood slowly, adjusting her coat. You didn't trust me, she said. You needed me. That's different. You came to me because you wanted someone to tell you you'd been right all along. He reached for her hand, desperate now. You said I was wasted potential. You said I deserved more. You pushed me to sign that restructure. I said you had potential, Lydia corrected. I didn't say I'd carry it when the floor fell out. Daniel's voice cracked. You helped me untie the company from Evelyn. Lydia's eyes hardened. No. You tried to untie your company from your marriage on paper. You put me in charge of a structure that depended on money you don't control and never understood. On paper, you signed everything over to me into a system built on someone else's money. You did that yourself. The sentence was calm, final. Daniel stared at her. You're leaving? I already did, Lydia said. She stepped past him without another word. No apology, no hesitation, just exit. Daniel remained seated, stunned, watching her walk toward the door. When it closed behind her, something inside him collapsed. Outside, across the street, Thomas Reed lowered his camera. Thomas stood near a parked car, unremarkable, blending easily into the sidewalk crowd. He took one last photo as Lydia walked away alone, time-stamped, clear, undeniable. Another quiet piece of the record he was building, Daniel shifting loyalty, Lydia stepping out the moment things turned hard. He wasn't there for revenge. He was there for evidence. Daniel stumbled out moments later, eyes unfocused, phone buzzing again in his hand. He barely noticed Thomas as he passed. His phone vibrated sharply. A new notification from his email flagged priority. From Henderson legal subject. Divorce petition filed and served. Immediate attention required. His pulse skipped. He tapped it open with shaking hands. The words appeared slowly on the screen, each one heavier than the last. Carter v. Carter petition for divorce grounds. Adultery and breakdown of marital trust. Attached, evidence bundle and funding disclosure notices. Daniel's breath left him in a single, broken exhale. He looked around the street, suddenly unsure where he was, where to go, who to call. Lydia was gone. The money was gone. And now so was his marriage. Somewhere far away, Evelyn's silence held firm. And in the next moment, Daniel would finally be forced to sit in front of the one person who had always understood the contracts better than he did and read what he had signed. Daniel Carter burst through the door without knocking. Paul! His voice echoed through the quiet office, sharp and uneven, carrying panic he could no longer hide. Paul Henderson, his lawyer, looked up from behind his desk slowly. He was pale more than usual, and that alone made Daniel's stomach twist. Paul was a careful man. He didn't panic. He didn't miss details. If Paul looked worried, something was already wrong. Close the door, Paul said quietly. Daniel did. Hard. What's happening? Daniel demanded. The funding stopped. The company's bleeding. Lydia's gone. And now I've been served divorce papers that mention funding clauses. You told me the restructuring would protect me. Paul didn't respond right away. He stood, walked to a locked cabinet, and pulled out a thick folder. The restructuring did protect someone, Paul said. Just not the person you assumed. Daniel stepped closer. What does that mean? Paul placed the folder on the desk and opened it to a section marked with a small red tab. This, Paul said carefully, is the clause you skipped over. Twice. Daniel clenched his jaw. You said it was standard. It is standard, Paul replied, for private capital that wants control. And it was explained to you when we first signed with Miller Advisory. Daniel's voice rose. Stop talking in circles. Paul turned the folder toward him. Clause 14. Read the heading. Daniel stared at the dense text, legal language blurring together as he searched for the bold line. Clause 14. Reversion of authority upon breach of marital trust. His throat went dry. Paul spoke slowly now, each word deliberate. Years ago, when you were desperate for funding, the primary investment came from a blind trust. Miller Advisory was the trustee. You were told at the time that the beneficial owner wished to remain private. Daniel shook his head. I don't remember that. I walked you through it, Paul said quietly. You signed anyway. You needed the money. Daniel's breathing grew shallow. Why is this about my marriage? Because the beneficial owner insisted on this condition, Paul said. If the primary beneficiary of the funded company, meaning you committed a serious breach of marital trust and their spouse chose to act on it, the investor's trust could withdraw funding and take control of the secured assets. You reaffirmed that condition when we did the restructure with Lydia. Paul flipped the page. The trust has now received a court-stamped divorce petition, he continued, with evidence attached. That legally confirms the breach they needed. Once that happened, they invoked Clause 14. Funding authority reverted to the original source. Daniel stared at the paragraph halfway down the document. Trigger activated. Formal notice received Carter marital estate. Status. Authority transferred to original trust beneficiary. Daniel's lips parted. His voice came out hoarse. Who is the original source? Paul hesitated. Daniel slammed his palm on the desk. Who? Paul exhaled, then reached for another folder, a slimmer one, sealed with a label that, until now, Daniel had never seen. Up until this morning, I was bound by confidentiality, Paul said. The trust released that restriction today, at the request of the beneficial owner. He removed the seal, opened the folder, and turned it toward Daniel. A single line sat in the center of the page, beneficiary of funding authority and reversion rights, Evelyn Carter. The room went silent. Daniel felt his legs weaken. He gripped the edge of the desk to stay upright, staring at the name like it might disappear if he blinked. My wife, he whispered. My wife funded everything? Paul didn't answer. He didn't need to. Daniel's mind raced backward through years of memories, contracts that never failed, investors who appeared at the last second, money that always arrived without explanation. Evelyn's quiet questions, her insistence on protection, her refusal to combine finances, her connection to Grace, the trustee he'd always treated as a distant banker. She knew, Daniel said hoarsely. She knew all along. Paul nodded slightly. The clause wasn't added recently. It was there from the beginning, before your company ever took off. Her trust backed you on the condition that if you turned your marriage into a liability, she wouldn't be forced to keep protecting you. Daniel shook his head in disbelief. Then why didn't I know? Because you never asked, Paul said gently. About the investor. About why such a specific condition was in there. You were in a hurry. You signed what you were told to sign. Daniel sank into the chair behind him, the weight of it crushing. He covered his face with his hands, a sharp sound escaping his chest, half laugh, half gasp. All this time, he murmured, I thought I built it. Paul closed the folder slowly. You built the front. She built the foundation. Daniel looked up suddenly. Can we undo it? Paul's expression hardened. No. Appeal it? No. The trust executed its rights under the contract, cleanly. The bank and regulators will back them. Negotiate? Paul shook his head again. The only person who could change anything now is the beneficial owner, and she has chosen not to. She's instructed the trust to enforce its rights and step away from you personally. Daniel stared at the desk, at the neat stack of papers that now felt like weapons. She didn't confront me, he said softly. No, Paul agreed. She didn't have to. Daniel's eyes drifted back to the folder. Something else caught his attention, something he hadn't noticed before. A signature, careful, precise, unshaken. Evelyn Carter. The date was years old. From long before Lydia, before the company, before Daniel believed he was untouchable. Daniel's chest tightened as the truth finally settled. This wasn't revenge thrown together in anger. This was preparation for the exact kind of man he had chosen to become. And in the next moment, Daniel would discover that the consequences of that preparation were not just private, they were about to become part of the public record. The courtroom doors closed with a heavy thud that echoed through Daniel Carter's chest. Every sound felt louder than it should have been. Footsteps, papers shifting, a quiet cough from the back row. Daniel sat stiffly at the respondent's table, his hands clenched together so tightly his knuckles had gone white. Across the room, Evelyn Carter sat upright beside her lawyer, calm and composed. She did not look at Daniel. That hurt more than anger ever could. The judge, an older man with a firm expression and tired eyes, entered and took his seat. The room fell instantly silent. "Let's proceed," the judge said. Evelyn's lawyer, Daniel Wright, stood. He was in his early 50s, measured, deliberate, known for never raising his voice. He didn't need to. His confidence came from preparation, not performance. "This court has been presented with a clear sequence of events," Wright began. As he spoke, documents appeared on the screen behind him. Funding trails, contracts, time-stamped approvals, digital signatures, photographs taken by Thomas Reed, message logs showing Lydia and Daniel's pattern over months. The evidence unfolded slowly, carefully, like a story Daniel no longer recognized as his own. Wright pointed to the screen. The petitioner, Mrs. Evelyn Carter, inherited substantial assets which were placed into blind trusts, administered by Miller Advisory Holdings. Years before this marriage began to deteriorate, those trusts provided funding to Mr. Carter's company through secured facilities. He clicked to the next slide. The facilities included a conduct clause and reversion rights. These were reviewed with Mr. Carter at the time and confirmed again when he elected to restructure his company and install Miss Lydia Moore as managing director. Wright didn't look at Daniel when he said Lydia's name. He didn't need to. Following evidence of an extramarital relationship, Wright continued, Mrs. Carter chose to file for divorce. At that point, the trust, under its existing rights, withdrew funding and assumed control of the assets it had always legally secured. Mark Reynolds sat several rows back, his face tight. He had already testified briefly, confirming Daniel's increasingly reckless decisions, Lydia's influence, and the moment they discovered Miller's suspension, Thomas's compiled records had been submitted as exhibits clean, legal, unemotional. When Wright finished presenting the financial structure, Paul stood to confirm on the record that Daniel had indeed been advised of the clauses, even if he chose not to pay attention at the time. Daniel felt the eyes in the room shift toward him. Affair records followed. Hotel invoices. Overlapping meetings with Lydia. Messages that no longer sounded innocent when pinned to dates and times. Daniel swallowed hard. Wright's tone never changed. The petitioner is not seeking punitive damages against Mr. Carter, he said calmly. She is simply asking this court to recognize the agreements already in place, the validity of the trust, the prenuptial structure, and her right not to continue shielding a man who used her money to build a life that excluded her. When Wright sat, Daniel shot to his feet. "This isn't fair," Daniel blurted out. "I didn't know." The judge raised a hand sharply. "Sit down, Mr. Carter." Daniel froze, then lowered himself slowly back into the chair, his breath shallow, his heart pounding. Evelyn never moved. She never defended herself. She never accused him. She never spoke at all. Her silence carried more weight than any argument. The judge reviewed the documents one last time, then looked up. "The court finds no evidence of coercion or fraud in the agreements the parties entered into," the judge said evenly. Mr. Carter signed the original funding documents and subsequent restructuring on advice of counsel. He had the opportunity to understand what he was agreeing to. Daniel's chest tightened. The court therefore recognizes the validity of the trust structure and the reversion of authority as exercised by Miller Advisory on behalf of Mrs. Carter. The judge continued. Any corporate consequences arising from that reversion, such as Mr. Carter's removal from leadership roles, are a matter for the company's governance and not this court. A murmur rippled through the observers. In the matter of Carter v. Carter, the judge said, divorce is granted on the grounds presented. The marital estate is divided in line with the prenuptial agreement and the existing trust structure. Mr. Carter retains personal assets not secured under the trust. Mrs. Carter retains what was always legally hers. The judge set down his papers. This matter is concluded. The gavel struck once. Final. Daniel stood slowly, his legs unsteady. The room buzzed with quiet conversation as people began to rise. But all he could see was Evelyn. She finally looked at him. Just once. There was no anger in her eyes. No satisfaction, no sorrow, only distance. The kind that could never be crossed again. Daniel took a step toward her before he realized what he was doing. "Evelyn," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Please, I didn't know." For a moment, it looked like she might respond. Then Evelyn stood. She gathered her papers calmly, nodded once to her lawyer, and turned away. Daniel remained frozen where he stood, watching her walk toward the exit without looking back. As she reached the door, Evelyn paused not for him, but for herself. Behind her, Daniel's future lay in ruins, built on money he'd never bothered to understand. Ahead of her, something else waited, and in the next moment, Evelyn would decide what, if anything, was left to say to herself. The silence hit harder than the courtroom ever did. Evelyn Carter closed the door behind her, the sound soft but final. The house felt different now, not empty, not heavy, just still. The kind of stillness that comes after a storm has already passed. She stood there for a moment, breathing evenly, as if checking herself for damage. There was none. Her phone buzzed once, then stopped. No more alerts from the trust, no more updates from lawyers, no more dashboards demanding constant attention. For the first time in months, everything was quiet because it was finished, not because it was waiting. Evelyn walked into her study, where sunlight fell across a clean desk. No clutter, no trophies, just space. She sat down, opened a thin folder, and slid out a stack of documents. New plans, new investments, new beginnings. Miller Advisory would continue operating. The trust would keep investing, but into projects and people she believed in, without the burden of protecting someone who had treated her like background. She wasn't tearing anything down anymore. She was rebuilding. A knock came at the door. Grace Miller stepped inside, calm as ever. Her posture hadn't changed. Her expression hadn't shifted. She had always been steady before the betrayal, during the collapse, and now after everything was done. Grace took a seat across from Evelyn. "Everything's finalized," she said. "The transfer of control is complete. The board at Carter Strategic Projects Limited has already voted to remove Daniel. The trust holds the secured assets, no loose ends." Evelyn nodded. She signed the last page and handed it back without hesitation. Grace studied her for a moment. "You're handling this well," Evelyn gave a small smile. "I prepared for a long time." Grace hesitated, then asked the question she had been holding back. "Do you regret not telling him who you were from the start?" The room was quiet again. Evelyn didn't answer right away. She looked out the window, watching the light shift slowly across the floor. Her reflection stared back at her in the glass, calm, older, wiser. "No," Evelyn said finally. "I regret that he never asked. Not once. Not about the investor, not about why I understood those contracts, not about why I stayed separate." Grace nodded. She understood. They sat in silence for a few moments longer. Not uncomfortable, not sad, just complete. When Grace stood to leave, she paused at the door. "What will you do now?" Evelyn closed the folder. "Live honestly, quietly, on my own terms, and choose people who ask real questions before they sign things." Grace smiled once, then left. Evelyn stood and walked through the house, touching nothing, needing nothing. The past didn't follow her. It stayed where it belonged. At the front door, she stopped and looked back one last time, not with longing, but with clarity. Daniel had thought success came from confidence. He had thought it came from being loud, admired, desired. He never realized it came from loyalty. He never understood that the loudest applause in his life had been funded by the quietest person in the room. And when he erased the one person who protected him, the truth simply stopped protecting him too. Evelyn stepped outside. The door closed behind her. She walked forward, unbothered, unchased, undefeated. Somewhere across the city, a man sat in a much smaller office, staring at a single, unpaid invoice on an empty desk. No trust behind him. No safety net. No wife quietly calling in favors. For the first time in his career, if Daniel Carter wanted to build something, he would have to do it without erasing the person who made it possible. I hope you enjoyed watching it as much as I enjoyed creating it. Like, share, and comment on the lessons you've learned. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. See you in my next video. Unaware his wife was the secret billionaire who quietly became the controlling owner of the company he worked for, he left her and their sick triplets to marry his boss. What happened next was cold, legal, and unstoppable. He didn't just walk away from his marriage. He walked away from 3 fragile lives. First in a neonatal hospital ward, where oxygen alarms screamed and doctors ran, and later in a boardroom and a courtroom that would erase the life he thought he was building. By the time the courtroom settled into silence, by the time the judge granted emergency custody, enforced support orders, and documented abandonment, Evan Mason still didn't understand how badly he had misjudged everything. Because long before the divorce papers, long before the wedding photos, long before his public collapse, he made his cruelest decision while his wife was standing beside 3 incubators. While Claire sat sleepless for nights, watching one baby's oxygen drop without warning, while nurses quietly noted every missed visit, while doctors warned her that stress alone could undo weeks of progress, Evan took a phone, called in a quiet restaurant, and said something that would later be recorded, time-stamped, and replayed in court. "I can't do this anymore. Not I'm scared. Not I'm overwhelmed. Just escape clean and selfish." He didn't ask which baby was critical. He didn't come back when one nearly stopped breathing. He didn't hesitate before moving in with his boss, the woman who made him feel seen. What Evan didn't know, what he never asked, was that while he was planning a new life, his wife had already signed documents that quietly made her the controlling owner of the very company he worshipped. She didn't scream in the hospital. She didn't confront him at his wedding. She didn't beg. She documented. She gathered proof. She waited for the law to speak louder than emotion. And when the truth finally surfaced, not in whispers, but in board meetings, court filings, and sealed envelopes, it didn't just shock Evan. It stripped him. Dear viewers, thank you for being here. If you watch without subscribing, it's like mistaking silence for weakness all over again. When you subscribe, you stand with every woman underestimated, every child protected by quiet strength, and every mind that chose strategy over despair. The machines beeped too fast. Claire Mason, 32, flinched as the sound cut through the white hospital room like a warning she could not silence. 3 incubators stood in a row, glowing softly under sterile lights. Inside them lay her newborn triplets, Noah, Lily, and Emma, each no bigger than her forearm, each fighting quietly to stay alive. Claire stood between them, her spine straight, her jaw locked. One hand slid through the opening of Noah's incubator sleeve, her finger curling gently around his. The other hand twisted a plain silver ring over and over, a nervous habit she had never broken. She had not slept in almost 40 hours, but her eyes were sharp. Fear had trained them that way. Her personal phone vibrated in her scrub pocket. She didn't look at it. Not yet. Claire leaned closer to the glass and whispered, "I'm here." Even though the machines didn't need reassurance. Maybe she did. The phone vibrated again. She pulled it out just long enough to see the notification, unknown secure line board packet ready for review. Her breath caught for half a second. She knew exactly what that meant. It was the encrypted number her family's trust used when regulatory approvals cleared. She locked the screen without opening it and slid that phone away. Behind her, footsteps approached. Sonia Mason, 34, Claire's older sister and only remaining family, entered with a large tote bag slung over her shoulder. Baby socks spilled out the top, along with medical forms and a half-crushed granola bar. "You didn't sleep," Sonia said softly. It wasn't a question. "They did," Claire replied, eyes still on the monitors. "That's good enough." Sonia moved closer, placing a hand on Claire's back. The muscles felt like a wire pulled too tight. A nurse stepped in quietly. Talia Brooks, late 40s, calm eyes, the kind of nurse who spoke only when it mattered. She adjusted a monitor, checked a chart, then hesitated. "Your husband missed the last 2 rounds," Talia said gently. "Morning and evening." Claire nodded once. No anger, no surprise, just confirmation of something she had already felt. "I'll note it in the chart," Talia added, carefully neutral. "Patterns matter for discharge planning." Claire gave another small nod. Talia left. Sonia watched her closely. "Evan said he'd come this morning," she murmured. Claire didn't answer. She was still holding Noah's finger, afraid that if she let go, something would slip away forever. A few minutes later, Claire stepped into a small consultation room down the hall. The air smelled different here, paper, polish, quiet money instead of antiseptic. Sitting at the table was Lionel Graves, early 60s, gray hair, precise posture. To the hospital staff, he passed as a concerned family friend. To Claire, he was the keeper of a life she had hidden on purpose. On the table lay a thick folder stamped, "Hartford Trust Private." Lionel spoke in a low voice. "The regulators cleared the last hurdle," he said. "The board packet is finalized. We're ready to execute." Claire sat. Her hands were suddenly steady. Lionel opened the folder and slid a document toward her. "One formality," he said. "You need to sign the acquisition authorization." He paused, pen poised between them. "Do you want to sign as Claire Mason?" he asked carefully. "Or as Claire Hartwell?" Her chest tightened. Claire Hartwell was the name she had not used in years. The name tied to oil rights, shipping stakes, silent holdings, and a family fortune structured into trusts and corporate shells so clean they barely left fingerprints. She picked up the pen. Signed, Claire Hartwell. Lionel slid a second document forward. Acquisition, authorization, majority stake, Klein Reyes Holdings. The holding company that owned the majority of the firm where Evan worked. "This gives you controlling interest," Lionel said. "Through the trust, public filings will only show Hartford entities for now." Claire didn't smile. "It gives my children a future." The room blurred, and memory pulled her backward. She was 22 again, standing at her parents' funeral in a black dress that didn't fit right. Lionel's voice over the casket flowers. "They left everything in trust. You are the sole beneficiary." She remembered signing document after document with shaking hands, her eyes swollen from crying. "Lock it away," she had said back then. "I don't want it touching my life." Years later, she was a junior analyst in a different firm, correcting senior executives in silence, watching her ideas reappear in other men's mouths. She learned quickly. Power survived best when hidden. Her father's voice returned, steady. "If they don't know what you're worth, they can't take it from you." When she met Evan, she told him nothing. She became Claire Mason. A woman with a modest job, simple tastes, and no inheritance. She wanted love that chose her without calculation. Back in the present, she wiped her eyes quickly. Lionel leaned closer. "The acquisition is under strict confidentiality. No press yet, no filings that trace to your personal name until the regulatory window closes." "Good," Claire said. "I don't want any of this touching Evan's job yet, or the babies." Lionel's gaze softened. "When ownership changes, people get exposed, Claire. Old loyalties, quiet misconduct. You'll see things." "Not me," she said. "Not until my kids are safe." She slipped her second phone, the one Lionel only ever called, back into her bag and returned to the incubators. This time she pulled out her personal phone and typed, "The babies are more stable. Doctors are hopeful. Thought you'd want to know." To Evan Mason, 35, mid-level executive, ambitious and exhausted. Minutes passed. His reply popped up. "Can't talk. Big night. Boss invited me. This could change everything for us." Claire stared at the screen. She looked at her children, then at the signed acquisition papers tucked in her bag. She didn't answer. For the first time, she wondered why her husband no longer felt like someone she could reach, and whether the world he was stepping into at work would soon collide with the world she had always kept hidden. Some doors were already opening, others were about to close. The elevator doors slid open too fast. Evan Mason, 35, stepped out into the glass-walled hallway with a report clutched in his hand, his smile already fixed in place. From the outside, he looked like a man on the rise, tailored suit, polished shoes, confident stride. From the inside, his right leg wouldn't stop bouncing. This place mattered to him, more than he would admit. Phones buzzed, keyboards clicked, voices stayed low behind glass doors. Power lived here, and Evan wanted to belong to it the way people want oxygen. "Man," a voice called out, "you're basically living here now." Evan turned. Jules Benton, late 30s, his closest co-worker, and the only person who still spoke to him like a human instead of a title, leaned against the wall with a coffee cup. Evan forced a laugh. "Somebody's got to keep the lights on." Jules raised an eyebrow. "Your kid's still in the NICU?" Evan nodded once. "They're stable. Claire says they're fighters." Jules studied him for a second, then let the silence sit. That was why Evan liked him. He knew when not to push. The energy in the hallway shifted. Marissa Klein appeared. Early 40s, tall, sharp, senior executive. Her suit fit like it had been tailored around her authority. She moved like someone who never asked permission. "Evan?" she said warmly, like she'd been waiting for him. Before he could respond, she reached out and adjusted his tie. She didn't ask. Her fingers brushed his collar, the touch precise and a fraction too slow. Anyone watching could call it mentorship. Anyone feeling it knew better. Evan froze. Marissa smiled. "You rush in the mornings," she said. "You need someone to slow you down." Thanks," he replied, clearing his throat. "You're wasted on middle management," she said casually, as if commenting on the weather. Evan straightened. "I'm doing what I can." "No, Evan," she said softly. "You're doing what you've been allowed to do." The word hit harder than he expected. Allowed. "Walk with me," she added. They moved down the hallway together. Jules watched them go, unease tightening his jaw. "I'm having a private dinner tonight," Marissa continued as they walked. "Career planning. A few investors. I want you there." Evan hesitated. "I don't know if I can. Claire's at the hospital and the babies." Marissa stopped. The smile faded, but she didn't look angry, just colder. "You talk a lot about sacrifice," she said. "You never talk about reward." Evan swallowed. Across the open office, Vivian Klein, Marissa's PR aide and distant cousin, sat at her desk typing. She glanced up just in time to see Marissa's hand still resting lightly on Evan's arm. She smirked faintly and went back to her screen. She'd seen this pattern before. Evan nodded slowly. "What time?" 8, Marissa said. "Dress sharp. People who can open doors will be watching." As she walked away, Evan felt taller, lighter, seen. Near a glass door, Noah Vance, early 40s, the company's compliance officer, pretended to read a policy memo. His eyes, however, followed the little scene. The touch, the pause, the way power leaned too close. He didn't say anything. He just stored it. Back at his desk, Evan sat down, the report suddenly unimportant. His phone buzzed. 3 missed calls. Claire. Her name still had the heart emoji she had added years ago when they'd been living in a small apartment and dreaming of a life they could barely afford. He imagined the hospital lights, the machines, the soft strength in her voice. Then he remembered Marissa's fingers on his tie. Her words, "allowed to." His mind slipped backward. He was 10, sitting at the top of the stairs, listening to his parents' voices. His father's words floated up clearly. "Being good doesn't matter. Being seen matters." Evan had kept that line like a rule taped to the inside of his chest. Back in the present, his phone buzzed again. A text from Marissa. "Wear the dark suit tonight, the one that makes you look like you already belong at the table." He flipped his phone face down, ignoring Claire's name even as the guilt pricked. Across the office, Jules watched him. "You okay?" Jules asked. "Yeah," Evan lied. "Just busy." As the day wore on, whispers moved through the office. Something about a new majority investor. Something about a quiet acquisition. Evan overheard Marissa laughing with another executive. "One day," she said lightly, "this whole place will answer to someone new. Wealth you've never even heard of." "Yeah, right," Evan scoffed. Marissa's eyes glinted. "You'd be surprised who holds power quietly." The word stayed with him long after she walked away. That evening, Evan stood in the restroom, adjusting the same tie she had straightened earlier. He practiced his smile, trying to look like the version of himself he thought he had to be. His phone vibrated again. Claire. He let it ring out. He didn't know that at that exact moment, she was filling out another consent form beside 3 incubators and starting to write things down. Someone else had already noticed the way his absence repeated. Someone else was already watching, and someone on the ownership level he worshipped had just quietly become his wife. The alarm screamed before anyone spoke. Claire jolted upright from the hospital floor, where she'd been stretching her back. The sharp, shrill sound cut through the neonatal unit, and for one terrifying moment, her heart convinced her that this was the call, the one they'd warned her might come. She rushed forward, but Dr. Saeed Rahman was already there. "It's okay," he said, calm but focused as he silenced the alarm and checked the monitor. Early 50s, senior neonatal specialist. His voice had carried her through too many long nights. "It's a monitor recalibrating," he explained. "Not a DSAT." Claire exhaled shakily, her knees momentarily weak. Dr. Rahman glanced at the charts. The new treatment plan is working, he said. All three are responding. Noah's lungs are still fragile, but he's holding his own. Claire listened the way some people pray completely. These next few weeks are critical, he continued. They need stability, predictable faces. The environment around them matters. They'll have it, Claire said. Dr. Rahman handed her a clipboard. More consent forms. She signed quickly, the paper rustling slightly in her unsteady hands. She smoothed the sheet flat, as if she could press her tremor out of existence. You're doing everything you can, Dr. Rahman said. Not comfort assessment. She nodded, afraid that if she spoke, the fear would spill over. After he left, the beeping machine settled into a steady rhythm. Her phone rang. Evan. She answered immediately. Hey, they're breathing on their own right now. The new meds are helping. That's great, Evan said. His voice was bright, almost too bright. Listen, I can't make it tonight. Claire's stomach tightened. In the background, she heard laughter. The clink of cutlery. A low hum of conversation, not an office. Where are you? She asked quietly. A last-minute dinner, he said quickly. Marissa pulled some investors together. This could be big for us. I can't leave. Claire glanced back at the incubators. Noah's chest rose and fell in tiny, determined movements. She could have said, they almost thought Noah was crashing. She could have said, I need you here more than they need you there. Instead, she swallowed the words. Okay, she said softly. Just answer if the hospital calls. There was a pause. I'm doing this for us, Claire, Evan insisted, so we're not always scraping by, so you don't have to worry about bills and everything. The words sounded like love, like care, like protection. But the sounds behind him, laughter, clinking glass, Marissa's low voice didn't match. I know you think that, Claire said. It was the closest she could get to agreement without lying to herself. She ended the call before he could say more. Behind her, Sonia had been watching. That didn't sound like a meeting, Sonia said quietly. Not everything that hurts is proof, Claire replied. Not yet. Nurse Talia approached, a chart cradled against her chest. Mrs. Mason, she said gently. Your husband phoned the nurse's station earlier. He asked us to tell you he's doing what he can at work. He said the same thing yesterday. Same words. Claire looked up. I only mention it, Talia added carefully, because patterns matter when we write notes. If you ever need those notes, they'll be there. Claire absorbed that. That night, as the unit lights dimmed, Claire sat in the corner chair, her legs tucked up under her. The triplets slept under faint blue glows. She opened the Notes app on her phone. She didn't type a paragraph. She wrote a heading, Visits Evan missed, canceled. Underneath, she entered today's date. Then the last 2 nights, she hesitated, then added, Called unit instead of Claire. Same phrase used. Sonia noticed. What are you doing? Preparing, Claire said simply. For what? For whatever his story becomes. Her second phone buzzed in the bag at her feet, the secure one. She pulled it out just enough to see the message banner. Acquisition tranche cleared. Klein Reyes majority confirmed. Effective date set. Her heart skipped not with excitement, but with the weight of responsibility. Her life as a hidden owner was now fused to the life where she hadn't even had time to shower. She locked the screen before Sonia could see. You okay? Sonia asked. Just tired, Claire answered. She looked at the incubators again. The lie she had just heard over the phone hadn't sounded cruel. It had sounded reasonable, noble even. I'm doing this for us. Lies that sounded like love, she realized, were the most dangerous kind. They were the ones other people believed for you. Somewhere across town, Evan raised a glass and let another person's approval wash over him, convincing himself he was still a good man. Somewhere in Claire's phone, the first lines of a timeline had just been written. The front door closed with a dull click that felt too loud. Claire stood just inside the entryway, one hand still on the knob, as if she wasn't entirely sure she was allowed to be here. They'd lived in this small house for years, but after days of living inside hospital walls, it felt like a set built for someone else's life. The baby monitor clipped to her bag crackled faintly, transmitting the soft hiss of oxygen and tiny breaths from the NICU feed. The hospital had given her remote access to the audio, so she'd agree to go home for a few hours. Sonia had driven her. Wash your hair, she'd ordered. Change clothes. Eat something that isn't from a vending machine. I'll stay with the babies. Claire dropped her keys in the bowl by the door and walked toward the bedroom. Halfway down the hall, she stopped. The air smelled wrong. Not trash, not stale laundry, just different. Not the mix of detergent and exhaustion she was used to. She stepped into the bedroom. Evan's suit jacket hung over the back of the chair instead of in the closet. He was usually careful with his clothes. She picked it up, meaning only to hang it properly. A small card slid from the inside pocket and landed face down on the floor. Claire bent down and turned it over. Valet claim ticket date, 3 nights ago. Hotel name, an expensive downtown hotel she only saw in glossy magazines. Her thumb pressed into the thin paper. 3 nights ago. He had told her he was staying late to finish reports. Her heart didn't race. It stilled. Slowly, she lifted the jacket closer to her face and inhaled. Under the faint scent of Evan's cologne was something sharper, floral, confident. Not the baby soap and coffee that usually clung to both of them. Perfume. The baby monitor crackled again, a tiny whimper through static, one of the triplets shifting in their sleep. The reminder pulled her back from the edge of spiraling. She folded the valet ticket and slid it into her pocket. If I'm wrong, she whispered, I destroy my family. If I'm right, he already has. Her phone buzzed. Evan. She stared at the screen for a beat, then answered. Hey, he said, sounding distracted. I forgot to tell you I can't come home tonight either. Things are complicated at work. Where are you? Claire asked. Another pause. Just a fraction too long. At the office, he said. The lie was smooth, practiced. She didn't challenge him. The babies are sleeping, she said instead. Noah had a scare yesterday, but he pulled through. That's good, Evan said quickly. I'm glad. Look, I have to go into another discussion. I'll make it up to you, okay? The line went dead before she could answer. Claire sat on the edge of the bed, jacket still in her lap, and stared at the open closet. She didn't cry. Her body felt too tired to give up the water. A knock on the front door. Sonia opened it with her spare key. You find clothes? She called out. Claire stood and began pulling clean shirts from drawers. Yeah. I'm ready to go back. Sonia noticed her clenched hand. Claire? I'm fine, Claire said. Let's go. They returned to the hospital. Talia met them at the unit entrance. They've been steady, Talia said. Then, more quietly, no call from your husband today. Claire nodded. Thank you for telling me. That night, after Sonia dozed off in the visitor's chair, Claire stepped into a quiet corner of the hallway and pulled out her phone. She scrolled to Lionel's number. Do you still know someone discreet? She asked when he answered. You mean an investigator? Lionel replied, unflinching. Yes, but not for revenge, Claire said. I need facts I could put in front of a judge if I had to. Nothing illegal. Nothing that could blow back on the trust. Understood, Lionel said. I'll have someone call you. Use your personal number, not the secure one. The next afternoon, Claire sat in a modest cafe 2 blocks from the hospital. Not hidden, not dramatic, just far enough that she could breathe. Across from her sat Rita Chang, mid-40s, neutral expression, sharp eyes. I document patterns, Rita said. I don't tell clients what to feel about them. Claire nodded. I need to know where my children's father is when he says he's working late, and how often it involves his boss. Rita didn't flinch. I can track publicly accessible records receipts, cameras in public spaces, and anything a court can subpoena later if needed, Rita said. No hacking, no gray areas. I don't work in shadows. I work in timelines. Good, Claire said. If this goes to court, I need whatever you find to survive cross-examination. Rita gave a single, approving nod. Then we go slow and clean. After they parted, Claire sat for a moment longer, unwilling to go back to the hospital with this new layer of reality pressing on her chest. She opened her social media app to distract herself and immediately saw a story at the top of the feed reposted by the official company account she followed as a passive investor. Marissa's profile picture. A boomerang of champagne glasses clinking, Evan's username tagged in bright letters at the bottom, the caption, "A new chapter begins." Claire stared at the looping video. Evan's face wasn't visible, but his watch, one she'd saved for months to buy him, caught the light at the edge of the frame. She locked the screen. Her heart didn't shatter, it hardened around something simple. Whatever happened next, she would not be the one guessing. The jacket, the ticket, the perfume, the story, and now, an investigator. Somewhere across town, Evan convinced himself that new chapters were about freedom. Claire was already making sure there would be a record of how the last one had ended. The monitor didn't beep this time. It screamed. Claire spun toward Noah's incubator just as the oxygen saturation on the screen plummeted, numbers dropping from green to a furious red. "DZAT," a nurse shouted. "Bag him now," Dr. Rahman ordered. Already at the bedside, hands moved fast, tiny mask, oxygen bag, gentle but urgent compressions. The small space around Noah's incubator filled with bodies and wires. Claire stumbled backward until her shoulders hit the wall. Her hands shook so violently she had to lace her fingers together to stop herself from rushing in and getting in the way. "Claire," Sonia said, gripping her arm tightly. "Look at me. They've done this before. He's not alone." Claire's eyes stayed locked on Noah's chest. It fluttered unevenly beneath the tubing. Her phone vibrated in her pocket. She almost ignored it. The screen lit up. Evan Hope flared up on reflex. Irrational. Desperate. Maybe he was calling because he felt something was wrong. Maybe he was already on his way. She answered with shaking hands. "Evan, Noah's crashing. They're trying to. I can't do this anymore," Evan said. In the background she heard low music and the faint clink of cutlery, the muted calm of a restaurant, not the harsh beeps and frantic footsteps around her. The words were so out of sync with the terror around her that for a moment she thought she'd misheard. "Do what?" she managed. "Be their father?" "Don't twist it," Evan snapped. "I've been drowning, Claire. I'm killing myself at work, and you act like it's never enough. I feel like I don't exist unless I'm at that hospital." Behind her, a nurse adjusted Noah's mask. Dr. Rahman watched the numbers with surgical focus. Claire pressed her back harder into the wall. "They're sick," she said. "They need both of us." "They need you," Evan said. "Marissa gets me. She sees what I'm capable of. She doesn't make me feel like I'm just failing all the time." There it was. Claire could barely get air into her own lungs. "You're leaving us, while your son can't breathe." "You're making this dramatic," Evan replied, his voice disturbingly calm. "I'm moving out. I'll set up a transfer when I can. I can't keep doing this just to drown in guilt. I'm allowed to be happy." A harsh little laugh escaped her, half disbelief, half broken. "You're not choosing happiness," she said. "You're choosing escape and calling it happiness." Silence. "I hope one day you'll understand," he said finally. The call clicked off. Claire stared at the screen, the call duration mocking her. Seconds. Just seconds. Enough to break something that had taken years to build. Her legs gave out. Sonia caught her, easing her down before she hit the floor. Claire's phone slipped from her hand and landed face up on Sonia's thigh. The little red dot blinked on the call log, recording in progress. Sonia froze. In the earlier chaos, she grabbed at Claire's hand, and her thumb must have hit the record button without meaning to. She looked at Claire. "Do you want me to stop it?" Claire looked from Sonia to Noah's incubator. The numbers had started to climb slowly back toward the safe range. "Leave it," Claire whispered. Her voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. "If he can walk away this easily, we're going to need proof he did." Across the room, the alarm softened. "He's stabilizing," Dr. Rahman said after a few agonizing minutes. "That was close, but he's back in range." Claire blinked hard, forcing her vision to clear, and pushed herself upright. She walked to the incubator and laid her forehead gently against the glass. "I'm here," she whispered to Noah. "I'm not going anywhere." Her second phone buzzed in her bag. She pulled it out with her free hand. "Board meeting confirmed ownership transition briefing. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. The words barely registered. The two worlds of her life, the one where she signed as Hartwell and the one where she sat beside her son, were colliding whether she wanted them to or not. Sonia stepped closer. "Who are you calling?" she asked quietly. Claire looked at her children. At the red imprint the incubator edge had left on her forehead, at the screen, still showing the tiny red recording dot from Evan's call. "A lawyer," she said. She opened her browser and typed, "Family law, emergency custody specialist near me." One name stood out again and again in reviews that mentioned words like calm and unshakable. Grace and Becky Family Law. Emergency custody. Claire hit call. The phone rang once. Twice. Grace and Becky's office. A composed voice answered. Claire swallowed. My husband just walked out on our premature triplets, she said. One of them almost died while he told me he was choosing happiness. I need to know what the law can do before he decides he's suddenly ready to be a father again. Come in, the voice replied. Today, bring any medical records you have. Claire ended the call and looked back at her children. Some doors in her life had just slammed shut. Others, heavy, legal, and documented, were about to open. The door closed with a quiet, deliberate click. Claire Mason felt the sound more than she heard it. Grace Mbecky's office wasn't designed for emotional breakdowns. It was neat, precise, and edged in a way that made it clear. This room was for decisions, not drama. Claire sank into the chair opposite the desk. In her left hand, a thick folder of medical reports. In her right hand, a crumpled valet ticket from an expensive hotel. On her phone, screen dark but safely backed up, the still-saved recording of Evan saying, "I can't do this anymore," while Noah fought for his life. Grace, early 40s, hair pulled back, dark suit, calm eyes, didn't offer tissues. She didn't soften her voice. She leaned forward slightly. Which baby is most medically fragile right now? Noah, Claire answered without hesitation. His oxygen drops without warning. They call it desatting. Grace nodded. Good. We start from what's urgent, not what's emotional. The word stung, but in a way that made Claire sit up straighter. Grace flipped open the medical folder and scanned quickly. Premature triplets, extended NICU stay, high-risk lung complications. She tapped one page. You've been present for all of this? Every day, Claire said. Every night unless they force me to rest. Has your husband been present? Grace asked. Claire swallowed. At first. Then he said work was getting intense. He started missing visits. He called the nurses' station instead of me. Does he send money? Grace asked. Consistent support? Not promises, actual transfers. No, Claire said quietly. Not since he left. He said he'd send money when he can. Is there another relationship? Grace asked, her tone still flat. He's with his boss, Sonia answered softly from the chair beside Claire. He said she understands him. We have a recording of the call where he left. Grace's eyes sharpened not with gossip, but with focus. Let me hear it, she said. Claire unlocked her phone, scrolled, and played the audio. Sonia watched Grace's face instead of the screen. Evan's voice filled the quiet office. I can't do this anymore. They need you. Marissa understands me. I'm choosing happiness for once. Grace listened without expression. When the recording ended, she asked only one question. Did he know he was on speaker? Yes, Sonia said. We were both standing there. The nurse was in the room. He knows we were in a public, clinical space and still said it. Grace nodded slowly. Our jurisdiction allows one-party consent, she said. You were present on the call. This recording is legally usable. He can argue context, but he can't argue that he didn't say those words. She closed the phone screen gently and placed it on the desk. That's not revenge, Grace said. That's evidence. Claire's shoulders sagged a fraction, as if her body finally believed she wasn't overreacting. Before we go any further, Grace said, I need to understand the financial side. You said on the phone that you could support the children even if he didn't. How? Claire hesitated. I inherited a significant estate, she said finally, trust managed. My legal name on the trust is Claire Hartwell, not Mason. My parents taught me that money destroys relationships. I locked it away. Even my husband doesn't know the scale of it. We lived on our salaries and insurance on purpose, she added quietly. If I ever touched the trust, it was supposed to be for survival, not for lifestyle. Is your wealth public? Grace asked. No, Claire replied. The trust owns shells. The shells own assets. My name doesn't show up on public filings yet. Even the acquisition I just signed for. She stopped herself. Grace didn't miss it. Acquisition? Claire exhaled. There was no point half trusting her lawyer. I acquired controlling interest, through the trust, in the holding company that owns my husband's firm, she said quietly. Klein Reyes Holdings. The board knows me as Hartwell. My husband doesn't know it all. Grace was silent for a long moment. All right, she said at last. Then we separate your roles. In this office, you are Claire Mason, mother of 3 premature infants. The Hartwell side stays in the background until it serves a clear legal purpose. She stood and walked to a small whiteboard. In a crisis like this, she said, uncapping a marker, we don't lead with emotion, we lead with structure. She wrote, emergency temporary custody temporary support order, divorce petition, strategic timing, protective clause, stability and supervised contact. First, Grace said, tapping the board, we file for emergency temporary custody, premature infants, plus documented abandonment and a recorded call of him choosing a new life. Judges don't like that. She wrote, medical risk plus abandonment, next to it. Second, we request a temporary support order based on his income and lifestyle, not on his promises, she continued. He doesn't get to send money when he can. He sends what the law says he must. Third, she underlined diverse petition. We file the petition, but we time it alongside the custody motion. We control the narrative. Children's needs first, emotions second. Fourth, she said, underlining protective clause. We ask for terms that keep him from disrupting medical routines. No surprise visits that stress the babies. No removing them from care without consent. She sat back down and slid a stack of preliminary forms across the desk. These start the process, she said. You will sign them as Claire Mason. We don't drag Hartwell into this unless he or his new partner try to weaponize your finances. Claire picked up the pen. Her hand shook once. Then steadied, she signed. Claire Mason. Her personal phone buzzed on the table. A text from Rita. Hotel pattern confirmed. Multiple nights. All overlapping his late work claims. Documenting everything. Grace glanced at the valet ticket still crumpled in Claire's hand. We'll attach that to the investigator's packet, she said. It's not just that he cheated, it's that he did it while his children were in intensive care. Courts care about priorities. Grace picked up her own phone and dialed quickly. Lionel, she said when he answered. This is Grace and Becky. I represent Claire Mason in a custody and dissolution matter. I need written confirmation that her Hartwell Trust assets are insulated as separate property and that no public disclosures tie her to the Kleinrace acquisition yet. She listened, nodded once, then ended the call. A second call came in a few moments later. Grace put it on speaker briefly. This is Nurse Talia Brooks from the NICU, a calm voice said. Mrs. Mason told me you might call. I can confirm dates and times where the mother was present and the father was not. I've documented his missed visits neutrally in the chart. Thank you, Nurse Brooks, Grace said. We may need a written statement later. No opinions, just times and dates. I understand, Talia replied. Babies need consistency. The call ended. Grace looked back at Claire. One more question. You said your husband is involved with his boss. Does that boss still work for the company you quietly control? Claire nodded. Yes, Marissa Klein. But the board doesn't know about the affair yet. Grace exhaled, her mind already rearranging strategy. Then we will do this in two lanes, she said. Family court and corporate governance. You will not fire him in a fit of rage. You will not storm any offices. We will let compliance, conflict policies, and judges do the talking. She closed the folder, her tone cool and surgical. We serve him, she said, at the exact moment he feels untouchable. Claire stood. The weight in her chest was still there. But now it was organized, labeled, and held by someone who refused to let her beg for what the law already owed her. Outside, the city kept moving. Somewhere across town, Evan was rehearsing vows he should never have been free to say. And very soon, someone would walk into that carefully decorated life and hand him paperwork he wouldn't be able to charm his way past. The cursor blinked like a metronome. Claire sat in the narrow parent chair by the window. Her laptop balanced on her knees. The NICU was dim. Machines hummed. The triplets slept under a steady blue glow. She created a new folder on her desktop. Name, Truth, not Revenge. Not Evan, Truth. Inside it, she created subfolders. Medical calls, Rita. Investigation, workplace, NICU records. She copied and scanned charts, discharge summaries, and Noah's DSAT episodes. She imported the audio file of Evan's call. She saved her Notes app screenshot where she'd logged missed visits. Her phone buzzed. Rita. Claire stepped into the hallway before answering. I have a clean timeline, Rita said. All from legal sources. Later that day, they sat across from each other in a small conference room the hospital used for financial counseling. The table was too big for just two people. Rita spread out documents like puzzle pieces. Hotel valet receipts, she began. Exterior security cameras in public spaces near the hotel and publicly posted event photos, she continued. You can't see anything intimate, just arrivals and departures. Time-stamped. Him and Miss Klein arriving within minutes of each other, leaving hours later. Again and again. Claire's throat tightened, but her face stayed composed. Rita pointed to another printout. Restaurant bookings public system, no hacking. Her assistant often booked for Klein plus guest. The guest arrived and left with your husband. She flipped a page in her notes. One more thing. His assistant forwarded a few calendar invitations voluntarily after HR quietly reached out. She didn't want her name tied to what's coming, all that goes into the workplace folder. This isn't about proving he cheated, Rita said. That's obvious. This is about establishing a pattern of choice. Where he was when he claimed to be somewhere else. Courts care about patterns. Patterns stand, Claire said, echoing her own words from nights before. Rita gave a small nod. I'll send everything digitally to your encrypted share. Label it with dates. Your lawyer will know how to package it. That evening, after checking on the babies again, Claire waited in the driver's seat of a borrowed car in the shadow of her husband's office building. She watched employees leave, watched the lights in the top floor offices flicker off one by one. Finally, Jules walked out. He spotted her and hesitated. He slid into the passenger seat, glancing around as if someone might have followed him even into the half-lit parking lot. I shouldn't be here, he said. But I saw you once in the lobby when you dropped Evan lunch before. Everything. You look like someone who deserved the truth. Claire didn't argue. I'm not here to ruin his career, she said. I'm here to protect my children. I need to understand what kind of environment their father chose over them. Jules nodded, his jaw tightened. Marissa has done this before, he said. She finds ambitious guys who feel overlooked. She offers mentorship that crosses lines. They get fast-tracked for promotions, copied on emails they shouldn't see yet, introduced to investors as up-and-coming prospects. He scrolled through his phone and opened an email thread. He turned the screen toward her. Subject lines, policy exceptions, executive discretion. Marissa, overriding HR concerns about perceived favoritism and boundary issues. This isn't personal, Jules said. It's a pattern. If compliance looks, they'll see that Evan's not the first. He's just the most reckless while his life outside was falling apart. Claire studied the emails, memorizing key phrases. She didn't take screenshots. She didn't want Jules caught in a crossfire. You've helped more than you know, she said. Later, a condensed version of Rita's timeline and the policy excerpts Jules had shown her went out from an unmarked courier address. Not to gossip sites, not to social media, just to one department. Compliance. Across town, under fluorescent lights, Noah Vance sat in his cramped compliance office. A thick anonymous packet sat on his desk. He opened it. Inside, copies of hotel receipts, public photos, clipped email threads, and a timeline that matched everything Rita had built. No personal attacks, no insults, just dates, facts, and policy references. He read the cover note, submitted anonymously for review. Potential conflict of interest, favoritism, and abuse of executive discretion involving senior executive M. Klein and mid-level manager E. Mason. Noah adjusted his glasses. This isn't gossip, he said quietly to himself. This is evidence. Board chair Malcolm Reyes stepped in, closing the door behind him. You've seen the packet? Malcolm asked. Noah held it up. If we move on this, it has to be because of conduct, not because someone is angry about a wedding or a divorce. Malcolm nodded. Make sure it's bulletproof. If it's personal, it dies. If it's misconduct, it stands. It stands, Noah said. Down the hall, Vivian Klein typed an email draft with a subject line she thought would trend well. Executive romance sparks inspiration. She paused when two words drifted in from the corridor. Compliance audit. Her fingers froze. She hit select all on the draft, deleted it. Back at the hospital, Nurse Talia approached Claire at the nurse's station. I printed this for you, Talia said. It's a copy of the log where we note parental presence. I made a duplicate for myself in case the original gets misplaced. Claire looked at the stack of times and dates, her name in the present column, Evan's name increasingly blank. Thank you, Claire said. Children deserve consistency, Talia replied. If the law needs to see who showed up, it will. That night, Claire sat back in her chair and opened the truth folder again. It was no longer empty. Doctor. Raman's notes. Noah's near-fatal desat. Calls. The recording of Evan choosing Marissa while Noah struggled to breathe. Rita. Investigation. Receipts, timelines, photos, workplace. Jules's forwarded policy threads summarized in Claire's own notes. NICU records. Talia's logs. Her phone buzzed. Rita again. They're planning an engagement announcement. Some kind of public reveal around their wedding. Timing soon. Claire looked from the screen to the three incubators. They're about to celebrate a new love story, she thought, while I'm building a record of what that love cost. Outside the window, the city lights glowed. Somewhere across town, two adults were picking floral arrangements and photographers. In a quiet NICU, a mother was picking dates and documents. One of those stories would be rewritten. The other would be entered into evidence. The cameras flashed before the officiant even said, "I now pronounce." The event space had no windows and no clocks, just soft, controlled lighting and too many reflective surfaces. Crystal marble, metallic accents, everything polished to match Marissa Klein's image. At the end of a white aisle runner, Evan Mason stood beside her. His suit fit better than his conscience. He smiled for the photographers, shoulders back, eyes bright on command. This was the life he thought he'd traded up for. Champagne flutes waited on mirrored trays. A string quartet played quietly. Corporate friends mingled with extended family and select investors. This wasn't just a wedding, it was a PR event for a senior executive. In one corner, Vivian Klein moved like a director on set. "Keep Marissa slightly ahead of him in every shot," she murmured to a photographer. "It reads leader. An angle away from the bar, no bottles in the background." Evan didn't hear any of that. He was focused on acting like a man who had made the right choice. In the back row, watching with a closed expression, stood Malcolm Reyes and Noah Vance. Officially, they were there because Marissa had invited key stakeholders from the company, and it would have looked aggressive not to attend. Unofficially, they were there because a compliance audit was underway, and Malcolm wanted eyes on everything. "Remember," Malcolm said under his breath, "we respond to conduct, not to scandal. Let them hang themselves with their own decisions." Noah nodded, holding a thin folder under his arm. The vows wrapped up. Applause. Posed kiss. A fresh burst of camera flashes. Then, as the couple stepped off the small platform, the crowd parted not for a photo, but for a woman in a dark suit. Grace Mabecki. She walked forward calmly, not rushing, not hesitant. This was not a scene to her. This was a job. "Mr. Mason," she said clearly, her voice cutting through the murmurs. "You've been served." She held out a sealed envelope and a clipboard. Conversation stuttered. A violin string squeaked. Someone near the back gasped softly. Evan stared at her, smile faltering. What is this?" "Petition for dissolution of marriage," Grace said, accompanied by an emergency custody motion and temporary support request. "We attempted home service. You were not available." Evan's throat worked. He didn't move. "In this jurisdiction," Grace continued, "formal service requires acknowledgement. You can sign now, or I can ask a process server to block your exit. Either way, you will be served." Marissa stepped forward, anger tightening her jaw. "This is wildly inappropriate," she said. "You can't storm a private event. This is a legal notification delivered in a public venue with ample witnesses," Grace replied. "You chose to make your new relationship public while leaving 3 premature infants in intensive care. The law is simply catching up to your choices." A few guests looked away, suddenly fascinated by their glasses. Evan's hand trembled as he took the pen and scribbled his name on the receipt form. The envelope felt heavy in his hand. Vivian snapped at a nearby photographer. "Stop shooting," she hissed. "Now," but it was too late. Several guests had already lifted phones, then guiltily lowered them again. Grace turned slightly. "Miss Klein," she said. Marissa stiffened. "Yes?" A second envelope was held out to her. "Notice of internal investigation," Grace said. "Conflict of interest and misuse of executive discretion. The board's outside counsel prepared this. I'm simply the courier, not the author." Marissa snatched the envelope, opened it just enough to see the heading, Notice of Investigation, Compliance and Ethics, and closed it again. Her eyes flicked instinctively to Malcolm, who remained expressionless. Vivian saw the letterhead. Her expression changed calculation, replacing loyalty. She slid her phone into her bag. "No more posts today. This event is over," Marissa said through clenched teeth. "Everyone, please give us a moment." The string quartet stopped mid-phrase. Minutes later, Evan found himself alone in a side hallway, fluorescent exit signs casting sickly light down the beige corridor. He dialed Claire. She answered on the second ring. There was a soft hiss in the background. NICU oxygen, not a party. You're doing this now? Evan hissed. At my wedding? You're trying to ruin me? Claire's voice was flat, calm, different. No, Evan, she said. You ruined you when you left 3 sick newborns and called it choosing happiness. I'm just documenting it and letting the law read it out loud. This is insane, he snapped. You're jealous, you're bitter. I'm organized, Claire replied. He heard a faint monitor beep behind her, the life he'd walked out on. He opened his mouth to spew something else, but she spoke first. Also, she added quietly, tell Marissa the board meeting is tomorrow, 10 a.m. She might want to read her investigation notice properly before then. What board meeting? He demanded. The line went dead. He stood alone in the hallway, wedding music muffled behind closed doors, an envelope of legal documents in his left hand and a new ring on his right. Somewhere else in the city, a different envelope was being copied, labeled, and added to a board packet. Truth wasn't rushing, it was arriving exactly on schedule. The boardroom doors closed with a heavy, padded thud that felt like a verdict. The next morning, Evan stepped into the glass-walled conference room with Marissa. He'd barely slept. The envelope from Grace had sat on his table all night, unopened after the first page. But this room, this table, still felt like power to him. He clung to that. Around the table sat board members, legal counsel, and Noah Vance with a thick binder. At the head of the table was Malcolm Reyes, hands clasped, expression unreadable. Only one chair remained empty. In front of it, a nameplate. C. Hartwell. Controlling stakeholder Evan frowned and leaned toward Marissa. Who's Hartwell? He whispered. Marissa didn't answer. Her jaw clenched. The door opened. Lionel Graves entered first, carrying his leather portfolio. Behind him walked a woman in simple clothes, hair pulled back, no expensive jewelry, just a plain silver ring on her finger. Claire, not in hospital sweats. Not in exhaustion, just steady. Evan's brain refused to connect the pieces. Claire? He said, pushing back from his chair. She didn't flinch. In here, I'm Hartwell, she said quietly. Please sit down, Evan. Lionel took the empty seat beside her. Claire sat behind the nameplate. Malcolm cleared his throat. This emergency board session is to address internal findings from compliance and the arrival of the controlling stakeholder, Miss Hartwell, whose interest recently crossed the majority threshold. Evan looked from the nameplate to Claire, then to Lionel. You bought the company? He stammered. No, Claire corrected calmly. I acquired controlling interest in the holding structure that owns it, through a family trust. Before you left, not after. It hit him then. All the unknown secure line notifications, the quiet way she had handled paperwork, the fact that she never seemed stressed about bills, no matter how hard he thought he was working. Noah opened the binder. This review concerns conflict of interest, abuse of executive discretion, and failure to disclose a power-imbalanced relationship, he said. His tone was clinical. He began reading. Dates, emails, hotel receipts, exceptions logged under executive discretion that directly benefited Evan's career progression. Mr. Mason received preferential access to investors and high-visibility projects after entering a personal relationship with his direct senior, Noah said. There was no disclosure to HR or compliance. This violates our ethics and conflict policies. Marissa leaned forward. I mentored a promising employee, she said. Anything beyond that is his private business. Malcolm raised an eyebrow. Private business doesn't get billed to company accounts. He flipped to a page of expense reports. Hotel charges coded as strategy retreats, he read, multiple times, all coinciding with nights Mr. Mason's wife reports he was working late while their infants were hospitalized. A few board members shifted uncomfortably. Noah turned another page. We also have internal correspondence from HR, raising concerns about a pattern of similar relationships in prior years, dismissed under executive discretion. And we have evidence that an internal communications plan was being drafted to spin this relationship as inspirational to staff. Vivian's deleted headline, resurrected in email form. Marissa's eyes flicked briefly toward the doorway, as if hoping Vivian might appear and save her. Vivian did not. She'd already extracted herself. "This is personal," Marissa insisted. "Someone is trying to weaponize—" "No," Malcolm said quietly. "This is documented." He folded his hands. "Based on compliance's findings and the controlling stakeholders' concurrence," he continued, "the board has decided on immediate corrective actions." He looked at Evan first. "Mr. Mason, effective immediately. Your employment is terminated for violation of conflict of interest policy and participation in an undisclosed relationship with a superior that directly influenced your advancement." Evan surged to his feet. "You can't do this. I earned—" "Sit down," Malcolm said, not raising his voice. Evan sat. Malcolm turned to Marissa. "Miss Klein, you are placed on administrative leave pending full legal review. Your access to internal systems is suspended. Your role will be evaluated in light of potential liability exposure." Marissa's lips trembled for half a second before she caught herself. Through it all, Claire said nothing. When it was over, she spoke only once. "We will also be reviewing our policies around family emergencies," she said. "No parent should feel they must choose between career survival and staying by their child's bedside." No one argued. Weeks later, a different gavel tapped. Judge Helena Duarte presided over the family courtroom, a smaller, solemn space where the stakes were heavier than any boardroom. Claire sat beside Grace at the petitioner's table. Evan sat across from them, with a different lawyer and a much thinner folder. Grace stood. "Your Honor," she said, "the children were born premature and required extended NICU care. During this time, the petitioner, Mrs. Mason, remained consistently at the hospital. The respondent, Mr. Mason, began missing visits, stopped financial support, and left the marital home to live with his superior at work." She handed up Dr. Rahman's written statement and the NICU logs. "The medical records show repeated serious desaturation episodes for one child, Noah," Grace continued. "During one such event, as staff scrambled to stabilize the baby, Mr. Mason called and announced, quote, 'I can't do this anymore,' and stated that he was choosing happiness with another woman who understands him." The recording played briefly in court. Evan's voice echoed in the quiet room. Claire stared straight ahead, eyes fixed on a point just above the judge's shoulder. Nurse Talia took the stand. "She was there every day," Talia said simply, gesturing toward Claire. "He stopped coming. I don't have opinions in my notes. I just recorded presence and absence." Evan's lawyer tried to argue stress, burnout, financial pressure. Tried to say the recording was taken out of context. Grace countered calmly. "Context, Your Honor," she said. "The context is a neonatal unit, a baby unable to breathe, and a father stating he is choosing a different life while promising to send money when he can. The law doesn't evaluate feelings. It evaluates conduct." Judge Duarte looked over the document slowly. "At this stage," she said, "we are not litigating every emotional detail of a marriage. We are deciding what is safest and most stable for 3 medically vulnerable children." She looked at Evan. "You may rebuild your life however you wish," she said, "but you may not do so at the cost of abandoning legal responsibilities." She signed the order. She signed the order. "Emergency, temporary sole physical custody to the petitioner," she said. "Joint legal custody, pending review, with decision-making authority temporarily favoring the petitioner in medical matters. Support is ordered in accordance with the respondent's documented income level. Supervised visitation only, at a court-approved center, until further review." The gavel tapped. Claire exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Evan's shoulders slumped. In a quiet hallway afterward, Evan leaned against the wall the same way Claire had leaned against hospital walls so many nights before. He called Marissa. No answer. She stepped away from the nurse's station to answer, keeping the NICU doors in sight. You were the owner," he said, voice shaking. "You had money this whole time? You could have made everything easy? Why didn't you tell me?" "I was your wife," Claire said softly. "That should have been enough reason to stay." He had no answer. The call ended. Days later, in a rented office she was using to meet with her own lawyers, Marissa stood in front of Evan. The glow was gone. The lighting was unkind. "You're unemployed," she said. "You're under a custody order. You're tagged in an ethics report. Investors are nervous about any association with you." She slipped the ring from her finger and placed it in his palm like a refunded receipt. "You said you loved me," Evan whispered. "I loved winning," Marissa said. "Right now you're not a win, you're a liability." She walked out without looking back. Evan stared at the ring in his palm. The power he had chased had no use for him now. Down the hall, in a hospital room he no longer had free access to, Claire watched 3 tiny chests rise and fall, and chose not revenge, but something colder and more permanent: boundaries. The monitor alarm chirped once, then settled. Claire's head snapped up out of pure reflex, eyes locking on Noah's numbers. They dipped briefly, then steadied. She exhaled, shoulders relaxing. The NICU felt different now. The lights were still soft, the machine still present, but the atmosphere had shifted from crisis to cautious hope. The triplets were bigger, their cheeks softer, their fingers stronger. Noah slept with a nasal cannula instead of a full mask. Lily was learning to suck from a tiny bottle. Emma's chest rose and fell in a rhythm that no longer terrified anyone. Claire sat between their stations, a worn children's book open in her hands. And the light came back every morning, she read quietly, no matter how long the night had been. "Your voice sounds like you again," Sonia said from behind her. She leaned in the doorway, a coffee in each hand. "I never left," Claire said. "I was just busy surviving." Her phone vibrated on the chair beside her. "Grace." Claire stepped into the hallway before answering. "Final dissolution order came through," Grace said. "The temporary orders are now permanent unless he petitions for modification later and can prove meaningful change and consistent involvement." Claire leaned against the wall. "Custody." "Sole physical custody confirmed," Grace said. "Joint legal technically on paper, but with primary medical decision-making vested in you given his history. Support order enforced with wage garnishment whenever he has earnings on record. Protective clauses remain regarding unscheduled contact." Claire's eyes stung, but the tears didn't fall. "Thank you," she said. A courier arrived later with a sealed envelope. The final decree. Claire signed the acknowledgement of receipt next to her name. "Petitioner, Claire Mason." Responded, "Evan Mason." She closed the folder gently. When she turned back toward the unit, she saw him. Evan stood at the far end of the corridor, just outside the area restricted to authorized parents. His shoulders were hunched, his suit wrinkled, the confidence that once defined him nowhere in sight. "Claire?" he said as she approached. She stepped outside the unit doors and let them close behind her. The clear plastic window separated them from the children. "You look different," he said. "Stronger, colder." "No," she replied. "Just clearer." "I didn't know," he blurted. "About the money, about the company. If I knew you were," he searched for the word, "that rich, I wouldn't have left." The sentence hung there like a confession he didn't realize was devastating. "That's exactly why you can't come back," Claire said softly. "You should have stayed because I was your wife, because they were your children, not because I could pay your bills and pull your career out of the fire." "I'm their father," he said, eyes wet. "You're biologically their father," Claire replied. "Legally, you're a non-custodial parent with supervised visitation. What you choose to become beyond that is between you and the schedule the court approved." Footsteps approached. Grace appeared beside them, her presence quiet but anchoring. "Supervised visitation is at the center on Wednesdays and Saturdays," she reminded him. "If you miss those, it will be documented." Evan looked at Claire, hoping for some softening in her eyes. She turned away before he could find it. Dignity over cruelty. He walked down the hallway, shoulders slumped, past parents holding balloons and diaper bags. Claire re-entered the NICU and closed the door firmly. Across town, in a sleek apartment that no longer felt like a prize, Marissa sat alone on her couch. The news scrolled quietly on the TV. Headlines flickered. "Executive placed on leave amid ethics investigation." "Anonymous stakeholder tightens corporate governance company announces new family support initiatives." Her phone buzzed. A message from a powerful contact flashed on the screen. "We can't be associated with you right now. Too much exposure. We'll revisit later maybe." Marissa stared at her reflection in the darkened TV for a long time. For the first time in years, no one was asking her for advice, access, or approval. Back at the hospital, Elder Miriam Okoye, a hospital chaplain who had quietly visited once a week, stood beside Claire at the window, looking in at the triplets. "Some people think love is proven in holidays and parties," Miriam said softly. "But love is proven in hospital corridors, In sleepless nights, in showing up when no one is watching. Claire nodded. I learned the hard way who understood that and who didn't. Then you have already won the most important case, Miriam said, and gently squeezed her arm. A few weeks later, Claire walked into a private meeting room downtown, not as a patient's mother, not as a scared wife, but as Claire Hartwell, controlling stakeholder. Across the table sat Malcolm and Noah. Lionel was there too, taking notes. Claire placed a folder on the table. These are the changes I want, she said, not as punishment, but as prevention. Malcolm opened the folder. Inside, drafted policy proposals. Clearer ethics rules about supervisor-subordinate relationships. Mandatory conflict disclosure. A family medical support fund for employees with hospitalized children. Protected leave policies for NICU parents without career retaliation. You could have used your position to destroy them, Malcolm observed. I didn't buy into this company to destroy anyone, Claire said. I bought in to protect families like mine from people who treat other humans as disposable. Noah nodded slowly. We can implement this, he said. It will make us better. Later, in a quiet room just off the NICU, Claire signed one more document, not on a legal pleading. Not on a board resolution, just a simple hospital form transferring the triplets from critical status to step-down care as they prepared for eventual discharge. She signed, Parent, Guardian, Claire Hartwell Mason, Power and Love, finally aligned under the same name. She returned to the incubator's now partially open cribs and kissed each child's forehead. Mom's here, she whispered, and I'm not going anywhere. Outside, the first light of morning crept through the high windows, touching the monitors, the metal rails, and the three small faces in a soft, pale glow. He thought marrying Power would save him. He never realized he had betrayed the only power that was quietly trying to save his family. I hope you enjoyed watching this story as much as I enjoyed creating it. Like, share, and comment on the lessons you learned. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. I'll see you in my next video.